Well, hello there, you beautiful, beautiful people. This is video 2 of 2. So if you've only seen, if you've not seen any, you've already missed one. So after this video, go and watch it. But anyway, I'm getting straight into the meat and potatoes. And before we crack on with this, I just want to say, look, this is just me spitballing. This is me putting out an idea based on a conversation that I had yesterday. I had a conversation with someone who works and has worked in law enforcement for around 22 years. And he's been following this case as well because he's quite interested in the way in which this has been handled, what he's seen, the information that's come out. And look, at the end of the day, he feels that Bryan Kohberger has had something to do with it. But we spoke about the fact that Bryan Kohberger, and look, again, this is just me spitballing. This has no grounding in law. This is not me saying that he did anything, he's involved. This is just me, off the back end of this conversation, putting this to you. Now, I look at Bryan Kohberger, and I don't necessarily see him as being this brutal killer. I don't. And look, some people will say Ted Bundy didn't really look like a serial killer or a mass murderer. He looked all right. And then I think to myself, there was always something about Ted Bundy, though. And there was Jeffrey Dahmer, BTK, another guy who stood silent. But you look at Bryan Kohberger, and he just seems like an intellect. And there's been some things in the background of what we've learned about him that makes you wonder whether there was something a lot more nefarious about what happened in terms of the Idaho 4 massacre. Now, Bryan Kohberger and Bryan Kohberger both were at Washington State University. That's where they resided. There has been rumbles and whispers that these two knew one another, interacted with one another. That has not been confirmed. It has only been whispered. But what do we know about Bryan Kohberger? We know Bryan Kohberger has a military background. And we know that in that military serving, he was put through something that was enough to put him in a position where he suffered from complex PTSD that would later in his obituary be used as an excuse as to what led to his demise. But what actually happened and what actually was his demise was that he held up his roommates with a gun and subsequently he was shot by SWAT. Now, during this period of time, you would hear that his roommates actually had got away. They'd got away and he was put down. He'd said something about, I'm going to kill my roommate, so on and so forth, and he was killed because they seemed to believe that he posed a threat. It was a viable threat and he needed to be shot. Now, on the other side of it, we have Bryan Kohberger, who is someone who is an intellect. People believe that wants to believe that he is the smartest man in the room. He's a clever guy. He's got a lot of years of experience in the legal field. He studied crimes. He put out something that was asking people to come to him to talk about things that they had done, so he could get an understanding of the psyche of the criminal mind, what they went through psychologically, perhaps leading up to a crime, during and after, so he could study that in depth. So, what do we also know? We know the Idaho 4 murders were done in a very, very small window of opportunity. Very small window of opportunity. And it would seem that in one essence, we're supposed to believe that the sleeping roommates who survived the attack didn't hear anything. They didn't hear screams. They didn't hear a struggle per se. They heard things, but not enough to put two and two together and think, what's going on? And it would seem that one of these survivors had actually slept through the entire ordeal. And we hear other people who have come out and said that sound does travel through that property. Again, that is not confirmed. There is kind of, we don't know 100%, but there was a statement that was, think about your house now, could 4 people be brutally massacred in it, and would you know about it? Or could that be done relatively silently? And if it had to be done relatively silently, what would it take for it to be done? Swiftness, accuracy. Would someone who has never done this before have a swiftness and accuracy to do it without being caught, without being heard, without being the sounds of the attack that would rouse other people? Who would you say, if I was to say, who do you think would have that skill? Is it someone who is book smart, or is it someone who is military smart? What do we hear in the Idaho 4 case? We hear that there is something saying, don't worry, I'm here to help. Is it beyond the realms of possibility that Bryan Kohberger had got involved in Brent Kohberger? He had arranged for Brent Kohberger. He had manipulated Brent Kohberger into doing this attack. Perhaps he'd lied to him. Perhaps he'd given him a story of how they had bullied someone. They had picked on people, or they were bad people, because he wanted to see whether he could manipulate someone to do this crime. And when it was said that someone was heard saying, don't worry, I'm here to help, would it not be out of the realms of possibility that that was in fact Bryan Kohberger entering the property in order to tell Brent that he was there to help him? Hear me out. So at the moment, we're in a situation where we're hearing that there's potential exculpatory evidence that Dylan Mortensen, she sees someone all dressed in black with a black mask. She doesn't mention that they're carrying a knife. She doesn't mention that they're covered in blood, like yada, yada, yada. We have then Bethany Funk, who claims, or it's you think, that she is saying that she saw someone leave the property who was undressed, naked. Naked. And we've always said, how would somebody who done all of this crime, everything, have gotten out of that house without dragging any form of blood or anything outside that property? We've also questioned multiple times whether one person or 2 people done this crime. Now, if it wasn't Kohberger on his own, but we believe that Bryan Kohberger could have been involved in this crime, again, is it not beyond the realms of possibility that it was in fact all along Bryan Kohberger and Brent Kohberger? Is there anything to support this motion? Now, we know that Brent Kohberger, obviously something was going on that triggered his PTSD. Something happened. People with PTSD, they have triggers, and something usually pushes them to an event, and that is extreme stress or anxiety. Something happens that pushes them into it. Now, do you think that being involved in a potential crime of this nature and feeling that things are perhaps getting close to you, is that enough to push you into having an episode? Obviously, there's a confusion over the Elantras. Some people think it was white. Some people said that one of these footages, it looked silver. It's been rumoured that Brent Kohberger potentially had a silver Hyundai Elantra. Again, it might be that they just both drove over there in Bryan's and that's nothing to do with it. But what I'm trying to get my head around is Bryan Kohberger, if he did he do it on his own? Did he have the skills to do it this quick? How did he know that he could get in this house and get away with it? Or was there a lot more planning involved? Was this a bigger thing for Bryan? And was it Bryan who in fact planted the sheath to stitch Kohberger up? Is that why it seemed relatively clean? Because it had actually been placed there after the murders, but it was placed there by the person who had come in to help. Was this orchestrated all along by Bryan Kohberger? And is this situation that he's in now, does he feel that because they are so hell-bent on pinning it on him and him alone, and he ultimately knows he didn't do it, albeit he was involved in the background, he was the wizard behind the curtain, so to speak, that he could potentially exploit a mistake because he knows he didn't do it. But all he's got to do is prove that he didn't do it. Again, I'm just spitballing. Because at the end of the day, we have 4 victims. We have someone who's prime suspect being charged and about to go to trial, who, in my honest opinion, doesn't look like he could punch his way out of a wet paper bag. But he does, however, look like he could manipulate a room. And when I talk about things that could potentially bolster this idea, we also know that there was posts leading up to the demise of Bryan Kohberger on his Facebook that were map coordinates. Random map coordinates. He was starting to spiral out. But as soon as the public got hold of this, the family closed that account down. So nobody could actually access what was going on. But something was happening to Kohberger. Something was happening. 100% OP, something was happening. He was having an episode. There was something that had pushed him into it. Now, could it be complete coincidence? Could it be a complete coincidence that he just happened to have an episode that would end up with him being shot around the same time someone on the same campus had travelled over from Washington to Moscow and massacred 4 people in a military-style execution? Tell me I'm a nutcase, please. And if you're going to, tell me why down below. And I'll catch you all in the next one.